Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, prepare to tumble into the Paleolithic pits of terror as we unleash two of history's stalagmitiest warriors. In this corner, passing through time like dust in the wind, monsters! But you'd better watch out, for the challenger knows what scares you. Are you afraid of the dark? Let the geological record show that this is Up Your Spooks!
This week's theme:
evil statues.
Well, Jeff, it's a sad and solemn occasion.
It is indeed. It's a farewell to a friend, nay, icon.
Our very last episode with
Dr. Vink.
Dr. Fink?
Vink with a v.
And what a long, strange trip it's been. But before we get into that, perhaps we should do the rundown on your terrifying episode.
So, this episode of Monsters, Rain Dance, is a pretty good match for evil statues, and we'll see what else it brings to bear. We start with a shot of a parched desert, and then we see Vanessa, a sultry blonde, and when her man, Tom, comes home, he finds her packed and ready to leave. They are suffering through a terrible drought, and she saw a lizard, and he is not paying attention to her needs. Tom is a con man who sells fake antiques, but he has actually found the relics of a lost prehistoric tribe, and he has exploited the local natives to haul out all their goodies for him.
Why can't you do something respectable like Bill?
Like Bill? Vanessa, he's on trial for insider trading. He's a criminal.
He's a white-collar criminal. It's so tasteless.
Their fight is interrupted by a knock at the door. It's a hunched old woman with a raspy voice, and she has something for Tom. They unveil a statue of Masao, god of death. Masao is a horrifying fanged demon draped in skulls that just happens to have the proportions of a little person, but that is neither here nor there. So Tom plays hardball and agrees to buy it for $20. The old woman tells them that once her people danced for rain, but they paid a price, death for life. That was Masao's bargain. Then the people got greedy, and a great drought destroyed them. Everywhere Masao walks, there is nothing left but stone and dust. I mean, guys, this lady is vinking to beat the band.
Yeah, let me just tell you, this lady, tour de force.
Masao knows. Wherever Masao walks, nothing remains but stone and dust.
Tom and Vanessa bone down to celebrate their newfound treasure and talk about going on vacation to someplace where the economy is collapsing. They are grade A heels. So they hear things moving and breaking, and they find one of the priceless masks shattered, and Tom thinks they're being robbed. He grabs an axe and searches the place. Vanessa shows him that the mask is now disintegrating, and Tom is furious because he thinks that the natives have ripped him off instead. He starts ranting that he's going to sue the entire Indian nation, sue the government for allowing Indians to be in the country. Like, it's pretty shocking stuff. Later that night, Vanessa wakes up to apply some moisturizer, and she kind of does a little drive-by insult on the statue of Masao. And when she's looking in the mirror, she sees its head turn. But when she checks, everything's going back to normal. It's just a creepy statue that just happens to have the proportions of a little person. Don't worry about it. She, goes back to dabbing on her moisturizer, and when we see Masao begin to move, he's flexing his fingers, and he steps off his little skull throne. But now he is alive. He has a face full of yellow sharp teeth and bulging dead fish eyes. He grabs her, and she runs to wake up Tom. And this is great because, she's being assaulted, she's turning to dust, and she's screaming, and he's like, "Go back to sleep." I thought it was pretty funny. At this point, she realizes that she's in a bad way. She is rapidly desiccating, and then Masao hits her with a full-on ray of petrification and turns her to stone.
I mean, I'd rapidly desiccate too if my boyfriend went on such an anti-native screed in my nethers.
I don't think she had a problem with that, provided it pays the bills. So Tom wakes up, he finds all of his relics turned to dust, and then all of a sudden he starts to grow a coating of dust. And unlike Vanessa, who looked all like leathery and decrepit, he just looks like a mime.
He just looks like someone threw flour on him.
Yeah, it was like pancake white makeup, which was really funny. But then Masao starts stalking after him, and Tom is just confused. He's like, "What's going on? You're a statue. You shouldn't be moving." He says he's going to leave, but it's a trick. Grab an axe. He grabs an axe. He goes after Masao, but Masao is too quick. Masao is ducking and dodging every swing of the axe, and pretty soon Tom collapses. In the morning, the old woman returns, drops the $20 on the petrified Tom, and then the drought breaks at last. The end.
So are we to believe that there's suddenly going to be a lush oasis in this area that hasn't had rain in 30 years or whatever?
The 23-year drought that the old lady describes, I don't think that was 23 years ago. I think that was sometime in the past.
Centuries ago?
Yeah, but it's unclear because this is like a lost civilization. It's not a 23-year-old civilization that disappeared.
Right.
And so her ancestors ran afoul of Masao and then were all turned to dust.
How did she escape?
How did she? How can she be related to people? Maybe she's a branch family and she wasn't living in the lost city. I like that Masao turns things to stone and dust. Like he sucks the life out of things. And turning stuff to dust is a great move for like an entropic death god. Bringing the rain seems outside of his jurisdiction. Like stick to dryness. That's your thing.
Yeah.
Not wetness.
There'd have to be like a co-god, a statue of life.
Or the god of the sky. So he brings like boiling sun and also rain.
God of the sky should have been -1 point.
Or if it's something like he's related to the sky god so that,
Yeah.
Masao takes out the trash with death and then the sky god can then refertilize the land with water. This is an audio medium, and we've talked about some of the effects on these monster episodes before, but they really knocked it out of the park with Masao. It had a very Mortal Kombat vibe, like all of it. The music, the sound effects, the makeup, and the character design all like screamed Mortal Kombat, but this came out 10 years before Mortal Kombat, the movie.
As usual with monsters, the effects team on point. Everyone else asleep at the wheel.
How dare you? These actors were hamming it up.
The show is so tired.
It's always two people in one room. And that's what I love about it.
I hate the show.
It's so good. They just get right to it.
They do get right to it. I'll give you that much.
But look, it's not about monsters. It's not about me. It's about the esteemed Dr. Vink.
Indeed it is, and loath am I to wander down the final road, but here we go. In the tale of the dangerous soup, the Midnight Society, Jeff's favorite scamps, are all talking about their fears. Betty Ann's afraid of attics. I think Kristen is afraid of birds or something. Frank is telling the story, and he's like, the attic can't get you. Birds can't hurt you, but I kind of take exception to that, because birds can definitely hurt you, especially if they're eagles or any other raptor.
Harpy eagles, raptors.
Even a tiny sparrow could hurt you if it flew into your head at high speed.
And historically, They were probably giant birds that used to hunt us when we were little primates.
And also, attics can hurt you. There's exposed insulation up there. It can make you real itchy.
Asbestos.
Asbestos.
Spiders. You can fall through the floor.
Right, yeah, man. Oh, so dangerous. So valid fears. Being totally dismissed. And anyway, he gets to Tucker, and Tucker ain't afraid of nothing. Frank is like, yeah, we'll see. Anyway, he tells the story of the dangerous soup, which is really why we're all here. It starts off, it's kind of like a cold open, and there's a dude stuck in a big blue room with huge spinning fans and a filthy, disgusting chair. A panel opens in the wall, revealing a statue, and a very familiar voice says,
"It knows what scares you."
And a snake pops out, and then very quickly we dissolve to present day Neve Campbell, who is the hostess at a very fancy restaurant called the Wild Boar. Ding. Vink factor number 1. They love boars in the Vink household. A different waitress hands a bunch of customers some menus, but they're like, no need. We're just here for one thing only. And it's the soup, which is super popular. The dangerous soup, if you will. And it costs 100 bones a bowl. A clumsy busboy, this is important, a clumsy busboy knocks into the waitress and spills a bunch of knives on the floor. She throws a fit. She says, I'm not picking those up. I don't mess with knives. The end. So while everyone's distracted, trying to pick up the knives, the waitress tries to sneak a taste of soup. But Neve Campbell warns that she will get fired if she gets caught. The chef appears in the dining room to rapturous applause, and it is none other than Dr. Vink with a va. And he's disgusting, and there's stains all over him, and his wild hair is not protected behind a hairnet. And if I was him, I wouldn't show my face in the dining hall, because it's a surefire way to get people out of your restaurant.
Or a health code violation or something. I mean, it does double duty, because it gives you more Vink, and you see the applause and the adoration he's getting. But also, it proves how good this soup must be. If you could look at Dr. Vink and still drink the slop he's serving, because, oof, like, I was just kind of agog at how sloppy and stained and mildewed his chef's outfit was.
Extra sloppy.
And it looks like he'd just been like rubbing old cabbage and mustard on himself. And when you look at like his sweaters and his jackets and his suits, they all have that same mustard cabbage patina, and you know his beard and his breath and his teeth gotta smell like it. Goddamn Vink.
Later on, the next day or days later, Neve Campbell, whose character is named Nani, but I'm just calling her Neve Campbell because she's Neve Campbell. Anyways, she's going over the books, and a squirrely fellow, Reed, arrives looking for a job. Neve Campbell explains about Dr. Vink, and Reed questions whether he's a doctor or a cook, to which Dr. Vink appears and explains that as coiffure is to haircutting, a chef is to a cook.
To those sage enough to know, I am a chef. A cook feeds the stomach. A chef nourishes the soul.
It should be also noted that Reed is a large, strapping fellow, and for a show about fear, you know, it's important that they establish this big guy who seems like he don't need anybody.
Yeah, he don't take no
Not
guff.
afraid of nothing.
He immediately gives Dr. Vink lip, which, of course, secures him the job. So, of course, Dr. Vink gives Reed a taste of the dangerous soup.
Let me have another taste.
One taste. To educate the palate. Try to sneak another, and I guarantee you'll regret it.
Reed does his work, and he never lets anyone help him. He only relies on himself. He's a real loner. I guess I remembered it as a montage, but I guess it's just a close-up of one mouth eating soup. All green and green.
Yeah, between the close-ups of old people eating green soup and Dr. Vink, this is like on par with some of the Tales from the Crypt and Monsters episodes we've watched.
And so time goes by in this fashion until all alone, he's about to sneak another taste of that soup. So Dr. Vink catches him, but Nev Campbell covers his butt. Just then, the knife-hating waitress comes in, screaming about being switched to a dishwasher. The problem is, she's a loudmouth, and the customers don't like her. Nev Campbell and Reed leave the kitchen, and he kind of chases her down to thank her for helping out, which he's not used to doing. He explains that he's always had to do things on his own, and he apologizes to her for being such a dick, which I thought was a pretty nice way to face at least one of his fears. Back in the kitchen, the loudmouth waitress is like banging on pots and pans, and Dr. Vink is like, whoa, you misunderstand me. I wanted to show you something that only my choice employees get to see. So he leads her into an empty freezer and locks her in there, and it's the room, the blue fan room from the beginning. So the panel in the wall opens up, the crazy gargoyle statue appears in its sconce. Her fear being knives, she ends up in a pit in the pendulum situation with a big gigantic blade swinging back and forth over her. Dr. Vink goes to a little side sconce, a little side cabinet, and he's watching this juice trickle down into a little vial. Another fun little detail is that when the people are being fear juiced, Dr. Vink peeks at them through a little slot in the freezer door. I don't know. It just tickles me. Nev Campbell and Reed hear the waitress screaming in fear, and they go and confront Vink. Reed, all tough guy style, is like, open the door right now. And Dr. Vink's like, no, you mustn't. But then the statue's done juicing the lady, so Vink finally goes, okay, whatever. Makes no never mind to me. Don't worry about it. And they let the waitress out, but she's like in a total daze, and she kind of doesn't remember what happened, and she wanders away. So Reed demands an explanation, and Vink tells him all about the statue's history and purpose while they are walking past a gigantic severed pig's head. I don't know if that appeared earlier in the episode, but Vink point number 2? Number tray? I can't remember. A lot of Vink points in this episode.
When they did their first slow establishing shot of the kitchen and they showed all the bottles and pots and pans, I was looking for a hand in a jar, and I was very disappointed when I didn't see one.
He's telling them that there was an ancient tribe that he came across in his travels, and they had the secret of fear. They had a statue that could extract fear from its victims, and when they drank it, they would have the victim's power, and it made them, like, super strong. And then I guess he bilked them out of the statue at some point and took it with him.
When you taste my soup, you're tasting fear. And that's a taste you won't soon forget.
And as he's telling them this, he's kind of waving the vial of fear juice around. And for the first time ever, I mean, I've seen this episode a billion times, I was like, oh man, I wish somebody at some point in this episode would just drink that whole vial and become some kind of super fearo.
I thought, very nice. I thought Reed was going to do that at some point, because later on, when they're each struggling in their own separate ways, there's almost like an organic moment where like Reed can access the vial, and I thought he was going to drink it all to like face his fears or swallow his fears or gain the power, but it never really comes back in any meaningful way.
Not so much. It's also a little bit of a slippery slope, because like in a kid show you have to teach kids that like facing their fears is a good thing, but if he had just drank the juice and gotten like a fear boost to face his fears, he wouldn't have had to learn anything, because the juice would have just done the work for him. But I still really wanted him to drink that fear juice and just Hulk out.
First of all, we need to create some cocktails to pair with our shows, and fear juice would be one of them. Secondly, one of our ratings in a lot of these shows is time to kryptonite. Mm-hmm. And usually when they introduce something in the beginning, it pays off later, and it's usually very obvious, like usually in the first 2 minutes, because it's a kid show. Uh-huh. And so the fact that the fear juice never really came into play. Don't forget to mention that the fear juice is the base for the soup.
The fear juice is the base for the soup, and that is why he can charge $100 a bowl and be Dr. Fink and still have customers knocking down his door.
In a darker show, Vink would use people up until they died, or he'd use them and then kill them and dispose of the bodies.
Oh, yeah. And put them in the soup, because you could put anything in that goddamn soup.
That's right.
As long as it's got fear juice in it.
He just lets people quit. He apparently only wants or needs a couple doses from each person.
Maybe you're right. Maybe you can only extract a dose.
And I think that's a fault with this statue because, you know, if you have a phobia, if you're like that girl who's afraid of addicts, you're just as afraid of addicts the first time as you are like the 100th time, right?
Well, you know, maybe these questions will be answered later in the episode because, as we'll see, Reed thinks this entire story is hogwash. So Vink dares him to step into the box, step into the octagon. Inside, the statue comes out, and Dr. Vink does seem to have some sort of psychic connection to the statue also. Because Vink is narrating the fear scene. He's like, I see an uncle, a cruel man, blah, blah, blah. So he knows exactly what the statue is conjuring. And sure enough, a coffin appears in the room, and Reed's dead uncle comes back to life and like comes at him Bela Lugosi style. And he's getting some real nice strong fear juice out of Reed. But Reed is freaking out, so Nev Campbell opens the door prematurely, and the statue escapes, and Vink freaks the fuck out.
You've unleashed it! It grew stronger with each feeding, and now it's out!
And then he becomes a super hero, and he's like, I must stop it! And he runs out of the restaurant, and Reed and Nev Campbell are like, we gotta call the cops. And Nev Campbell says like, and tell them, what, some fear demon is eating people's fears? And he's like, yeah, that's right. That's totally stupid. Never mind. And then the door slams shut, and they're like, oh god, it's back. Or maybe it never left. And the lights all turn blue. The statue starts chasing them around. It's appearing behind doors. It's conjuring snakes. It's blowing out the windows. It locks Nev Campbell in the freezer. And Reed is like, don't you worry. There's nothing in there that can get you. And she says, you don't understand. It's the room that scares me. She's a claustrophobic. And then the walls start closing in on her, which is actually a nice little touch, and probably how I learned about claustrophobia. No, it was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Part 1. That's how I learned about claustrophobia. And continuing on, Reed realizes that the only way to beat this statue is to face his fear. So he goes randomly to a different room, and the coffin appears. His uncle comes out and is about to strangle him to death, but Reed goes like, I'm not afraid of you. You're nothing. You're shit. And then the uncle disappears. And Reed goes into the freezer to comfort Nev Campbell. They go like, I don't think Dr. Vink's going to be able to serve any more soup. And it's like a goofy, happy kids show ending. But then the door slams to, and Dr. Vink says,
That's where you're wrong, my friend. It still knows what scares you. I plan on being in business a long, long time.
And the statue's back.
And the statue is back in its sconce, and it's wonderful. It's a rare, unhappy ending that you've been just jonesing for, and
it's horror that acts like horror.
Yeah, appropriate in our final Vink episode. So then back in the Midnight Society, which really doesn't matter, but Tucker still ain't scared of nothing. So Frank has this like box with a hole in it. He goes, I dare you to reach inside the box. And then Tucker...
You know he's doing the popcorn trick.
100%. So Tucker's about to reach in, but he chickens out because he's a scaredy cat, and then runs away.
And Frank has the Gom Jabbar, which is a needle of poison meant to kill animals, and he holds it to his neck.
Well, he is the group bully.
I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer.
So they go, well, what's in there? And Frank says,
exactly what Tucker's afraid of. Nothing.
As much as I hate Frank because he obnoxiously bullies the other people in the group, he is the only one that brings us Dr. Vink stories.
It's his character. Thereby, your hatred for Frank is as your love to Dr. Vink. Thereby, I submit to you that you love Frank.
I mean, by the transitive property, I love Frank, lack of sleeves, and the Midnight Society. This was a very trippy episode because not only do you have a statue that creates illusions based on people's deepest fear, but you also have Vink, who can interact or commune with the statue, and he also sees what people fear, or maybe he has just his own ghost science powers.
And he does have a lot of powers.
But at a certain point, the door is opened and the statue flies out and puts up its spooks, Goosebumps style, and the characters go on their individual journeys and face their individual fears. They end up back in the room, like we said. The statue's back there. Maybe it never left. Vink mocks them and says he's going to be in business making soup a long time.
Which proves that you can extract multiple times from the same people.
But do you think their greatest fear is that they cannot face their fear? And so this whole thing was like a dream within a dream to break them down and make them each think that they'd face their fears and realize that they were powerless?
This suggests that what you fear is fear itself. This is very wise.
So yeah, I would like to hear your best take at trying to unravel the box within a box they found themselves in.
I think that anything goes when you're dealing with a fear demon, and Dr. Vink, who himself is something of a fear demon.
Do you think they ever escaped? Do you think the fear demon ever escaped? Or was that all just an illusion in their mind created by the statue?
I think your theory holds water, much like a soup, but they worked really hard to establish that you can't open the door prematurely, and also they cut out of Reed's first fear juicing to go and have Dr. Vink watch the juice pour into the little vial.
Maybe he realized, because Reed was such a tough nut to crack and the fear juice he was extracting was so exquisite, that he needed to break Reed out of his individual fear and get him to that vulnerable emotional spot where he could fear for Nev Campbell and then torture them both.
Anything goes when you're dealing with a fear demon.
It knows what scares you.
Let's get into some ratings and reviews. Body count for Monsters, 2. Body count for Danger Soup, 0. Scare factor for Monsters, I'd say middling. The statue of Masao was incredibly impressive. That makeup was really good.
Very much so, yeah.
When it started coming to life, its eyes were so nasty. They were like rotten eggs.
You're right. They were death eyes.
Really, really foul. Scare factor for Danger Soup.
I mean, it was, oh man. It's hard to say because kids show, but I think it was well scary. Like, there did seem to be genuine danger involved.
We start with a snake, which is decently scary, I guess. And then we have the swinging axe blade pit and the pendulum scene, which is pretty intense. But I was thinking about kids watching this, and when they have that coffin appear, like, ooh, that's kind of intense.
They went there.
And later, the coffin opens, and his uncle comes out and is like trying to strangle him. Like,
I seem to remember being pretty
gnarly.
freaked out by that.
So I'd say scare factor high. Gross factor for Monsters, I'd say low to medium.
Yeah.
You know, Masao was pretty gross.
There was a bit of grossness when the lady first began dissolving, but then she just very quickly turned to like solid sand, so.
Yeah, it wasn't too gross. But gross factor in Tale of the Dangerous Soup.
Close-up mouths,
high.
Eating green soup. Dr. Vink, all mustard covered. Severed
Close-up
pig's heads.
of Vink's teeth. What the factor for Monsters? Now, this was my second viewing, so I knew where this was going, but what did you think on first blush?
I was surprised when it turned out that the statue was desiccating the items. I think it was surprising that the Tom, or whatever his name was so cavalier and upfront about how badly he was ripping everyone off. And then how evil he was about wanting to go back and destroy their entire society.
Not a lot of what the factor, you know, pretty obvious. Especially, like I said, the statue of Masao, for all its craft and artistry, very much looked like a little person in monster makeup.
Oh, yeah.
What the factor for Tale of the Dangerous Soup? Pretty high.
Pretty high, although when you introduce a statue that can manifest people's fears, I guess, again, anything goes.
If it were just that, it might have a lower what the factor, but because it's a Vink episode, it's not just enough that you have a magic statue that makes people's fear become illusions. It also extracts fear juice from them, which Vink was then selling as soup to make a profit.
And it also transmits thoughts into Vink's head, and it also causes amnesia.
And it also maybe escaped and they beat it, but then Phantasm style, they thought it was only a dream, and the tall man showed up and said, "No, it's not." And it turns out they never escaped the nightmare. So what the factor? High. All right. I want you to be honest. Vink factor for monsters. How'd the old lady do?
Oh, the old lady was sufficiently ranty, but not very gross. She didn't have a hint of mustard anywhere on her person.
She didn't seem to be that mustardy.
But she did
right.
have that wild gray hair. And I mean, she carried a death god on a leash, like a functioning death god. So I think factor pretty high for the old lady. I'm going to definitely give you that one.
All right. Vink factor for Dr. Vink.
Highest yet. Well, actually, maybe piano lessons or murder. He was a little...
Ironically.
A little bit vinkier.
As Dr. Shriek. Yeah, actually... Okay, totally 80s for monsters, I'd say pretty high. You've got relic hunting, which was like just a staple. After Indiana Jones, like it was all about
just
relic hunting
for these 80s factors. Every turn.
You don't remember what it was like. Okay, hella 90s for Tale of the Dangerous Soup. I mean, it's got Nev Campbell.
It's got Nev Campbell. That's about it.
That's strong.
Yep.
Lesson learned. Well, in monsters, you know the importance of moisturizing.
Not even moisturizing could save her, though.
If Tom had listened to Vanessa and they had left that night, if they'd taken Masao with them, I think they still would have gotten dusted.
Oh, yeah. No, they were doomed. It's like the genuine lesson is don't be like a greedy so-and-so.
Yeah, it's not very fun, though.
Well, but that's okay. If the episode genuinely was trying to teach you something, like, because this episode the episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark had a genuine moral, like they sometimes do, but we've run up against...
What was the moral of Dangerous Soup?
Face your fears.
But facing your fears turned out to be bullshit because they were still held under the sway of the evil statue in Dr. Vink.
Maybe it was face your fears to the best of your abilities?
The lesson was one taste.
To educate the palate.
So Ryan, what scares you? And I don't want to hear anything existential.
Thank goodness.
If you were locked in that chair and faced with Dr. Vink's magic statue, what would it know?
What would it manifest?
What scares you?
I know there's plenty.
Here's
like
the
I'm
thing.
not a brave person.
I feel like with phobias and stuff, you're exposed early. On the one hand, I think being traumatized by something early, your early fear becomes a source of fascination later.
Yeah.
But with certain like phobias when it comes to like snakes and bugs, I feel like when you're really little, if you get scared by something like that, then it kind of sticks. So the example I use is that we had tons of spiders growing up. We were all afraid of spiders. And to this day, many of my family members are still afraid of spiders. Whereas my wife never really had to deal with spiders, and they don't really bother her, that much. But she had cockroaches around, and so those totally freak her out. Whereas I didn't really see cockroaches until I was like in college.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, those things are awesome. They're like weird little robots with like little wiry antennae.
Ugh, not when they're in your kitchen, I'm here to tell you.
I mean, obviously you don't want bugs in your kitchen, but like they don't scare me at all. Silverfish don't scare me. Snakes don't really bother me because I didn't grow up with any of that stuff around.
Could be like a giant wasp or swarm or something, but I'm not necessarily scared of those either. It would be interesting if someone locked me in a room with a fear statue and said it knows what scares you. It would probably be something that some people would be like, sign me up. I want to know what scares me. I want to see what this thing manifests.
If you could say this is a fear that is holding you back from what you want in relationships and career and stuff, I think it'd be very therapeutic.
Well, that's too existential, though. In
the episode, Reed is confronted with the memory of his abusive uncle who died under mysterious circumstances. That is a little more abstract and existential You know, it's not a snake. It's not an axe.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess the fear statue will go there if it's cinematic. So just have cinematic fears, people. That's all I'm saying. All right, worlds collide. Masao, god of death, versus Dr. Vink and the fear statue. Who wins? I think we can both agree that Masao would dry up the fear juice and the soup just because they're liquids, right?
Oh, yeah, sure. And the bowl and the spoon and the stove.
Furthermore, Dr. Vink is using the statue for evil purposes, for greed.
Mm-hmm.
He's profiting off of it. And Masao hates that. And so Masao would turn the fear statue into dust, and he'd also turn Dr. Vink into a statue, which is fine. He's a ghost. It doesn't matter. So I think it's a stalemate between Masao and Vink, but Vink would lose a lot in the offing.
Yeah, well, or Masao would turn Dr. Vink into dust, and then the statue, the fear god, would just escape and run amok on the rest of the world. If that's what
it does.
Correct.
Either way, the wild boar is done for.
Oh yeah, I mean the wild boar probably can't last that much longer anyway. You know, Reed's going to escape eventually, and he's going to go back one day later, and the wild boar's going to be a bunch of weeds in the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can kill Vink with conventional means. He's more ghost than man. He's a product of dark science.
Perhaps this is all in his movie.
Exactly.
Perhaps we all are. So who wins in Put Up Your Spooks?
Tale the Dangerous Soup all day. It was a super spooky episode.
Delicious.
One taste to educate the palate. Try to sneak another, and I guarantee you'll regret it.
Ryan, come here. I want you to try this soup. Does this taste okay to you? It needs a little something, right? COVID. Trump.
It's getting there.
Alzheimer's.
Oh, that's the stuff. Can I have another taste?
But of course, educate your palate. Economic collapse. Mass extinction.
I'm feeling the rage of pure fear.
Rerun for your lives.